built in a way that does provide that clarity, but also provides a roadmap to solve the problems that come up, because they will.
Yeah, no, that's great. So Chris, you brought up the model law and some of the other the international aspects, because part of the challenge for the US is it's limited its capability to participate with some more stringent regulations or lack of clarity. What do you see from the sort of the global side that we've got to pay attention to in the US, and what's the positives that are happening outside of the US?
Well, there's a lot of different looks that we're getting around the world. It's been noted that Singapore has a good strategy. Dick mentioned that, and it's probably one of the better laws. MiCA in Europe is incredibly well written if you have the budget to cover it. I've heard estimates everywhere from 500 million to 1.6 billion as how much it costs to put the bureaucracy in play to actually operate under MiCA if you're going to follow all the rules. And then with the United Nations model law and the DC-BAS model law, that was more designed for smaller countries that don't have the budget to do that, so that they have the ability to have laws and have a framework without having to have 36 different offices managing 46 different data points. When it comes to the United States, we're really remedial right now. As Allison and Stacey have pointed out, we can't even decide on definitions. Like, if the rest of the world generally understands a cryptocurrency is a digital asset that is held on a decentralized blockchain. But then if we look at the rollout plan for the strategic reserves, the lead cryptocurrency in that after Bitcoin is on a centralized ledger and is not even a cryptocurrency. It's just a decentralized digital asset that doesn't have a centralized bank backing it. So we really need to work on the definitions and use, like, if we're going to play with the rest of the world, we have to be able to talk with them.
What are you referring to when you said the second largest currency?
I really don't want to put the name of it out there. I wasn't going to call them out. I think you know what currency I'm talking about. They have a very large following online. The number 3 one that was recommended was HBAR, which seems to be pretty good. But we're trying to participate, but we don't want to follow the rest of the world's standards. And that is something that, being an American, is a very unique perspective, because we do it with pretty much everything. We have our standards, the rest of the world has their standards. And since we were and are the global currency with petrodollar, we have a lot of say in that. But as cryptocurrency, and as we push cryptocurrency companies offshore that want to be here in the United States, it becomes really important that we look at why they're leaving and what rules that they need to know to follow, because Binance leaving the United States was a big thing, because the SEC stepped in somewhere that it has absolutely no business stepping in. If it's not a security token, it is not a security. It's in the name. It's a whole Charlie Kirk discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And we pushed billions of dollars offshore. And that's one of the things that we really need to do, is we need to look at what the rest of the world's doing, take the good, leave the bad, and move forward. Not sit here and try to reinvent the wheel, because there's been wheels for thousands of years, and I think we can run with it.
Okay, great. Dick, what are the types of initiatives that you've seen or expect in the TradFi world? You're on mute, yeah.
Sorry, now I'm back, yes. Maybe it's the crossover as a lot of firms are looking at tokenizing stocks, bonds, funds, whatever, right? To enable them to be transacted, settled, custody, cheaper, better, faster, right? On a multi-party book entry basis, distributed ledger versus central ledger to central ledger, right? So those are the kinds of things that, you know, I'm involved in a lot, is the notion of tokenizing something that's on separate rails, takes 2 days to settle, between counterparties maintaining central ledgers, to a network ledger happening in real time, and what's the efficiency benefit, what's the control benefit, what's the liquidity benefit of those things, and then what's the critical mass required to get that flywheel started, right? Because one party doing it doesn't really work. It's like having one telephone in a network, right? You need a number of people to do that. I go back to what Stacy was saying about accounting, right? Which is a taxonomy that's been tried and tested for hundreds of years, right? And I think there's still gaps in many of the protocols on how they handle accounting for simple things like payables and receivables, right? Easy to settle a transaction. The notion of a payable receivable, to me, looks like, maybe it's a smart contract, which is akin to a Post-it note on the side of your computer monitor that you hope you look at on the right day, right? It's different than booking that payable as a offsetting debit and credit between parties, right? And so that's sort of that technical gap that is facing up against the requirements realization that people need to go through.
Yeah. No, I guess if it looks like, I know there's purists that want to reject anything that's related to traditional finance, and there's maximalists. But if you could make the crypto world look like the accounting of the traditional world, the crossover becomes easier.
And accounting is a control framework, is what it is ultimately, right? So why would you throw out a control framework that's worked for hundreds of years, right?
Yeah. And it's a legal requirement.
Yeah. So if you can make accounting work on a networked basis versus a central basis, that's what we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, one of the weaknesses of some of the other taxonomies I've seen out there is that think about accounting rules in general. One of the examples I use is a building in, let's say, a small 6-story building in Manhattan is a building. So is a rundown shack in the middle of the Arizona desert. Both are buildings, both are on land, and they would both be in accounting records and accounted for according to buildings and land, wildly different, right? What other taxonomies and other systems of organization have been doing is they were trying to say, oh, well then building in New York is a separate category from building in Arizona desert, right? And what I did with mine is I said, nope, same thing. It gets accounted for the same way, same thing. I know it's wildly different. You can have a subcategory, you can have sub-distinctions if you like. Do whatever you like on those subcategories, but it's fundamentally the same thing. And that same thing happens with, the FASB standard approached it in a different way where they just said, hey, look, if you're accounting for a crypto that meets these 5 or 6, I think it might be 6 actually in the final standard, these 6 criteria, then this standard is going to apply to you, right? So they've avoided trying to specify some specific, they just call it digital assets broadly, right? And then, yeah, I'll leave it there.
That's good. Alison, I know you and I have both done a lot of work with the Government Blockchain Association with the blockchain maturity model. Now, right now, I think there's a proposal to add a compliance section, but can you talk to the maturity model and how it might help people?
So there are multiple levels, but we'll start with the level 1, and that's ensuring that you have everything in place and that you have mapped out what you need to do. And from the compliance perspective, it gives us an opportunity as assessors to essentially flag if something is missing. And that it's an interesting process because as with what you guys are just talking about with accounting and with legal and pretty much everything in this space, there's a lot of gray area and a lot of people who have different opinions or who can frame an answer in a way that the company needs it to be. But we as assessors can come in and say, hey, just because it was framed this way for this document that you have does not necessarily mean that just look and understand what the issues are from all angles because it might come up. And from compliance, there's a lot of opportunities to get on the wrong side of both state and federal regulators.
And even greater from the international side.
And we do look at it from an international perspective. It's just, so putting that out there.
At this point, I'm happy to, some people have been raising their hands, but I'll open it up for questions and then we can come back to the panelists for specific points. Michael Proper, I saw your hand up.
Paul, I think that the question that you're asking is a very wise one. And I would just like us to all pause for a second and just imagine if we could learn from the existing rules and regulations that have been adopted within, for instance, the Jobs Act. So we know and understand what a private offering is with a Reg D and what a public offering is with an Reg A plus. What if that was actually adopted in the digital ecosystem or realm in a parallel system as a standard? And then countries could, like there's lots of countries that have actually adopted the same thing inside of the Jobs Act. But if we were able to define that and then cryptographically tie that to a permissionless chain that actually followed the rules and regulations within the US, but did it in a jurisdiction that covers the whole globe. And it covers everything from commodities, equities, and currencies. And to be able to get into the currency side of it, one must actually purchase in at the fair market value of spot price for either silver or gold, which are looked at constitutionally as the true core money and value. And, it's got global liquidity, et cetera, and foreign exchange values. So just imagine if we actually matured the existing rules and regulations that most organizations or governments or kingdoms are actually using today in such a way where cryptographic assets can actually be automatically created. So imagine a digital world where you could actually create a digital business, so a D Corp or a D organization, instead of a C Corp or a S Corp or a LLC, et cetera. But it does it all digitally. So instead of a decentralized autonomous organization, which most of us are familiar with, it does it from the ground level up, all using cryptographic keys that are tied to an individual. And then it lets everything scale, just like we already use. Like you can create a bank account and a company that has 5 members to it and 3 of them are signers on a bank account. You could do the same thing in the digital world with a digital business. And all that would have to be understood is the laws and legislation in the digital world has to be refined, defined, understood, agreed upon, and it can parallel the existing physical worlds that we all live in, nations, kindred, countries, whatever you want to call them. So I would just throw that out as a thought. If that was real, it would solve a lot of the concerns that everyone has really been, it's not that we're just talking about today, it's that it's been morphing over years, right? So I would just throw that out there for the body and your consideration to ponder.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Eugene, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I apologize. I was late for this webinar. But I wanted to comment on several subjects that were raised. First of all, to Chris, I totally agree that the situation in this country is extremely detrimental towards developers that are trying to bring in new frontiers. And I hope that the new administration indeed focuses on improving the regulatory climate that would make people like you and me and many others, bring and develop here in the U.S. And so thank you for that. Now, what Michael actually said just now resonates with the topic that we had last week, the elections webinar. And we're seeing basically the same thing where universalization or universality versus particularism is really, a war, a battle that is happening right now, not just in finance, but also in elections and voting. And we also lobby for adoption of digital identities of citizens and adoption of mobile voting as an upgrade to existing legacy election systems. And I'm seeing the very similar processes in the world of finance. So thank you very much for having this discussion. I think it's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Chris, do you have any comments on the last two
I do.
points?
So we know that the statement was right because me and Eugene agree on it, because there's not a whole lot out there that, as you guys know, I think Eugene is one of the smartest people in the cryptoverse, and me and him agree on pretty much everything. There's a couple little degen elements that we don't agree on, but we agree on a whole lot of stuff. For using TradFi laws for all the crypto stuff, I'm really on the fence of that. I think about half of what crypto and DeFi does, we can draw from universal rules right now, especially common law rules. I do agree that, I'm sorry, I missed Michael. Michael, I agree with what he said on that. There are areas where the entire point of cryptocurrency was to step away from those rules and bring equity to the underbanked and the unbanked. And I think if we go down the same route with the same laws, I think those people are going to have the same problems. And we're going to have, 3.4 billion people that are underbanked or unbanked right now. So I think that there's a line to walk down. I agree with Michael. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If we try to reinvent the wheel, we're going to screw it up just as bad as the last generation that tried to reinvent the wheel. But if we look at what works and we take it out and use that, and look at what doesn't work and say, hey, we learned our lesson from this, I think we would do something that no human generation in history has ever done. And that's really learn from their mistakes. This is the first time in nearly 2,000 years that we haven't had a world war every 100 years. Now, we might have called it something different, but the world superpowers have a war every 100 years. And we're already 8 years late for that. So we're way ahead of, our generations are already doing well. If we can keep that war away as a global war and having like 25% of the population die. I know that there are people dying all over the world right now, and I'm not trying to be insensitive to that. But if we can move forward and, like Michael said, take the good, I think that's a really important step to take. And I do agree with him that there is a lot of room to do that right now.
Can I chime in really quickly? I think this is where the education piece is so important, because you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, of course. But until there is a real understanding of the differences and what Chris is talking about, why crypto got started, why you're trying to address the systemic issues that have existed both in the US and globally. And so how do you adapt? But then to me, the biggest piece is going to be education and continuing to get people who are actually making the decisions and actually putting the policy down on paper to engage and to be willing to learn.
Well, yeah, to my Eugene's point, and I think Chris's, the way I see it is that the blockchain or decentralized ledgers becomes a consistent protocol to capture transactions, whereas right now, everything you buy or sell has a different infrastructure. It all ultimately gets into accounting reports, but the way it gets there is via multiple infrastructures, and that's a huge expense. And that's I think part of the challenge is people tend to see the world as how they're defined or how they live, as opposed to something that's more universal. And I always make the analogy, the internet protocol, made connectivity and communication uniform. And that's why this video meeting, trying to do this video meeting with all these participants on the old video call infrastructure, setting up with your telephone companies and dialing in and trying to get multiple channels to all talk to each other at the same time was a nightmare. In fact, I don't think it would have been possible with so many participants, but the internet's made it easy. Just before I come back to you, Michael, I noticed that Milton, if he's still here, had raised that he thought Bitcoins and stable coins would be a big thing in 2025. Milton, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. And hi, guys. Yeah, I definitely see, from all the things that I'm working on, just a quick, intro, working on basically building the world infrastructure for world trade with Bitcoin, stable coins, and proper infrastructure for Bitcoin reserves for sovereign institutions and governments and central banks. And basically what I'm seeing is stablecoins is going to be, really regulated, defined, integrated this year. And so is Bitcoin. So I really see, Coinbase, Wrap Bitcoin, all custodians are doing Wrap Bitcoins and all these different blockchains. And you see that stablecoins like USDC, which is highly regulated, and compliant, they're being adopted across the board. There's a bunch of different pilot programs all around the world right now with big enterprises or organizations that I can't really mention. So that's what I feel like we should really focus on as far as regulation, because those are the two blockchain products or currencies that are actually working, and used, compared to everything else. And if we do not have accounting and we don't have clear definitions and we don't have, the proper compliance infrastructure for just those two digital assets, I don't understand why we would be focusing on anything else.
Great comment, Milton. Okay, quickly, Michael, and then I'll go to Court Welty, who's got a hand up. So
Thanks, Paul. So I think that the comment around the right and the left, let's just say the centralized systems and decentralized systems, trying to find that common ground and not losing it by adopting some of the centralized systems too much. I think in the end, really, decentralization is the key. And the Global Blockchain Association's core, at least from my perspective, value add, is helping to find that balance within what the world calls blockchains. But I personally don't believe that the actual solution to what was brought up around, what if that was adopted, then would the success of this even be done? 95% of anything in the blockchain or crypto world, in my opinion, is actually focusing on centralizing decentralization. So I would agree with that. But what I would say is it's not about blockchain, it's about identity. And if you can obfuscate the identity, for instance, if we look at this digital call that we're on, some of us use initials, some of us use first name, last initial, some of us use a truncated form of something or other. But if we can actually solve the identity issue and then solve the financial transaction issue and then enable abilities for human rights to be realized, such as privacy, the right to transact, the right to travel, but to all do it with a decentralized identity. For instance, all of us may not realize this, but in May of 2025, it will be law based upon the third push for the Real ID Act to be enacted. And if you don't have a driver's license with the beautiful little golden star on the top right corner, you won't be able to travel. In my opinion, there are certain human rights that have been violated because of the centralized systems, and this decentralized approach, whether it's in blockchain, permissionless, and I'm specifically talking about permissionless chains, because that's what solves the unbanked topic. But if we literally just focus on those types of human rights and then standards that government can get on board with, why? Because we follow the same rules and regulations they've already built, like the Jobs Act is a perfect one. Because the Jobs Act can solve a lot of the equities/securities, private and public. But then how do we solve, like people are talking about stable assets this year? I personally believe that any of the slow chains or expensive chains, so they take a lot of time and they cost a lot of money. I shouldn't say a lot because it's a lot less than the current system. For instance, on average, Visa processes about $14 billion a day at 2.4%. That's $336 million to process a fee that pays in 48 hours, 2 days. But Ethereum then can do it, about 26 million in gas fees and about less than 2 minutes on average. Bitcoin does it in about 10 minutes on average. And it's very efficient. I mean, Bitcoin's even more efficient than the Ethereum, but all of those, I believe, and I'm not saying negative things about Bitcoin because it's a wonderful store of value that's been proven, but I believe that 2025 will actually be a year where a lot of the technology that actually leapfrogs over the existing systems, real-time transactions, fees that are next to nothing. So no cost, no time delays, no government, no bank. on an identity system that can be truly private, but following along the parallel centralized laws of KYC, AML, et cetera. So with that, I think that a lot of the comments, they're spot on, but it's a matter of how do we actually make this become a reality now that things are going to start shifting over this next week in DC.
Okay, thanks, Michael. That's great. Sorry, I'm just conscious of the time, so I want to go quickly to Court, Welty, and then Gerard.
Yes, thank you. I'll be very quick. Thanks for having me, Chris, for the invite. So I'm leading a work group for tokenization of traditional financial products at the NDF. So we just joined the GBA. We'll be working with the GBA and the UN. Specifically, what we did find was there's a tremendous amount of economic damage that is done through distributed ledger technology. Specifically, massive slave compounds and the remnants of the Golden Triangle. And, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, React Task Force, Aaron West, some of these people are very interested in us having at least pseudo-jurisdictional profiles that restrict decentralized activity based on asset peer-to-peer translation. This one of the things that we found was very helpful, so I did want to bring it up to y'all, because we do need to learn from the mistake that we made of pairing everything to Tether that is backed by nothing. We're currently at a very precarious state with crypto, and that a lot of the liquidity that we currently rely upon doesn't exist. So as we start to design these new systems and ultimately create the underlying financial infrastructure for the next 1,000 years, we need to make sure that we don't, like you mentioned, overstep on human rights, and we do allow for that decentralized exchange of value. But at the same time, we do have to be cognizant of the fact that crime and fraud is the third largest economy in the world now, behind the US and China. So there is a certain amount of effort to be made in this regard.
Right, great. No, that's a great point. Great point. Gerard.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Paul, I'd like to thank you for hosting this. This is incredible content, and as always, you never disappoint. So thank you so much for you and all the folks that are a part of this. Secondly, I want to tag off of what Michael said about identity and how important that is, and I want to give a little bit of a promotion. So Dino Cataldo-Dell'Agio of the UN is leading a GBA working group focusing on protecting identity from deep fakes and AI attacks. So that I think is going to be something that is going to be really, really important as we go in the future. And the GBA project funding working group is working with is identifying opportunities to fund those projects. So we're going to be looking at National Science Foundation grants, a number of different grants to fund the work. So if anybody is interested in the topic of protecting identity from deep fake or AI attacks, please join the Identity Management Working Group. And then if you're interested in working with us on funded projects to solve that, please reach out to our project funding working group. So I just wanted to put those two comments in.
Okay, I'm just going to say a few quick things before I go to Eugene. And I know Chris had raised his hand again. I think one thing we haven't addressed is the work that's being done with central bank digital currencies, CBDCs across the world, but also outside of stable coins that are backed by fiat currencies, the cryptocurrencies and other similar assets. There's a question mark on, what's the threat or interaction with the current monetary system. And obviously the origins of Bitcoin was brought out of the financial crisis of 2008. So that'll be an interesting topic to cover for the future, because I think, the outside of the blockchain nature and decentralized processing, consistent processing is, it has an opportunity to really change the way the economics work in the world. Eugene.
Yes, Paul, thank you. So first of all, on your comment, there is a member of GBA which has a central bank digital currency product, a digital product with all of the required levels of complexity and depth, happens to be Broxus. So anyone who is interested in exploring the real solutions, you're welcome to contact me and I'll get you connected, or you can find them through GBA directory. Going back to what Court said, which is very important, I think. there are solutions today that allow you to, for the police and the governance bodies to track and trace any activity on blockchain. So with respect to any criminals, there are tools and mechanisms designed specifically to assist in locating of criminals and taking them to prosecution. So this is a very important point. And then finally, to what Michael said, digital identity is at the core of what you're describing. And I think that the discussion on anonymity, which took place at the latest GBA event in November, is very indicative of that. The United Nations level is admitting the right of people to remain anonymous or pseudonymous, conceivably, and so do some governments, others do not. So this is at the core, and if some of you may recall the Aristotle speech I gave, basically it comes down to whether governments will accept the fact that remembering 12 words is the only thing that defines a human's identity. And that's not an easy decision to make. Unlike a passport, that cannot be recovered or reissued. Yep. So there are some fundamental issues behind this discussion. Thank you. Back to you.
And you're saying the 12 words of a passkey for encryption. All right, we're nearing the end here. So I'd like to thank Stacy, Alison, Dick, and Chris for the contributions and everybody else from the audience. Before I go to Gerard for his closing comments, is there anything Chris, Dick, Alison, or Stacy would like to add?
Thanks for organizing this, Paul. I appreciate it.
And thanks for participating, especially at short notice. All right. Gerard, I'll let you sign off with the normal standard GBA advert.
Well, I don't have a normal standard GBA thing, but like everybody else, I'm super excited for all that. I just put a link in the chat to the GBA Web3 directory. This is something we're going to be developing. We have members in about 500 organizations around the world. So what we want to do is we want to let them know about Web3 solutions, right? So if you have a Web3 solution, and we're also later in the year, maybe next year, but hopefully later this year, we'll be putting together a Web3 services directory. So if you have a law firm, a fraud resolution company, investment, any of those, we'll have a separate directory. But we will be working on promoting this out globally. So if you have a solution and you'd like to be listed, of course the BMM certified solutions will be listed at the top, followed by the GBA members, and then the non-members. But we want acquisition officials all over the world to know that, hey, there are real blockchain-based, Web3-based solutions that are out there. It's not all just talk, and we want to do everything we can to promote those solutions. So just wanted to share that. And with that, Paul, thank you very, very much for everything you and your guests have done. Thank you, everybody who joined. Great content, and I just can't tell you how impressed I am about this group of people. So you guys have a great day.
All right, no, thank you, everybody. And believe it or not, this was truly unscripted. So thank you again.
Bravo, Paul.
Right.
It is recorded, Paul.
Yes, it is.